If we got far enough down the road in this world, let's say 28 decades later, we would see this kind of society start having kings and queens again, or an aristocracy.
Let's see if we ever get to make three movies, because it would essentially addresses that.
This movie really took me back, and one of the many things I loved about it was the look of the film, and it got me curious. Danny, was it important to you to return to an emphasis not just on digital photography, but, like, for example, the kinetic editing and the narrative propulsion really made me think of late 90s and early 2000s cinema? Was that deliberate for you?
I don't know whether it was deliberate in quite so analytical a way, but I certainly, it felt instinctively the right way to approach the story. I mean, Alex writes in that way anyway. You kind of sense it, although he writes very sparsely, the propulsive nature of the storytelling, whether it's visceral or not, it's very skillful. You don't dwell on things too long. You move on. The story keeps shifting and moving on. We wanted to acknowledge the visceral storytelling that you got in the first film, the visual look of that, but updated, really, because the technology is updated. And we did it through a very widescreen format, the 276 format, which is a beautiful landscape to look at nature, because our study was not going to be a deserted city. It was going to be nature. It was going to be nature has returned. And that nature theme is beautiful to look at. And it's shot beautifully so that it has that sensual, beautiful appeal, a wonderful ingredient to have in any horror movie to counterpoint the horror, if you like. But it leads you towards the look at nature itself is also what has happened to these people, how have they survived? They're dependent on nature to survive. But also the virus has evolved. Nature, and it is nature as well. It also responds to time passing and evolves and changes, and hence the different levels of infected that you see. You hope form and content come together as much as possible.
Related to that, Alex, why did it make sense for this version of an apocalyptic UK to kind of return to a feudal medieval society?
I was born in 1970. I think for a lot of my life, it felt like one lived in a progressive state, that is to say, a state of looking forwards to how the world could be made more equitable and more fair. And in the last 10 to 15 years, and I mean this in a literal way, it's become more regressive. There's a lot of looking to the past. And it's a version of the past that has some component elements in it. One of them is amnesia. It's just simply forgetting or omitting some elements of what the past was really like. Danny and I are old enough to remember the past. It also will cherry pick, so it's selective in what it chooses to remember, and it also misremembers. So it sort of half remembers something, but then distorts it along the way. And certainly the last few films I've worked on have been quite preoccupied by a sense of amnesia, of lessons that felt impossible to unlearn following, say, the Second World War and the way the world saw itself and configured itself and what it perceived something like democracy to be or represent. And all of that's been blown apart, whether it's an understanding of what war is like, an understanding of what the role of democracy is, or any of those sorts of things. I've been preoccupied by this for a while now, and so this is a sort of continuing look at that.
Do you think if we got far enough down the road in this world, let's say 28 decades later, we would see this kind of society start having kings and queens again, or an aristocracy?
Well, I'd say let's see if we ever get to make three movies, because it would essentially addresses that. I'd also say, like, it's important to understand just that community that you see. It's not telling a broad position. It's really what happens if you take technology away, and where do people look, and what is it that they choose to remember, and how do they configure themselves? So it's a kind of background note rather than the whole scheme. But by the end of the second film, it definitely, the scheme starts to get more stated.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today, and congrats on the film.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
See ya.